Today I'm going to look at an incredible video that someone just put out that I watched, and it made me want to jump out of my chair because it answers so many questions that many of you ask on a daily basis. Hey, why haven't you had that guest on the channel? Why not? What's going on? And this YouTuber, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, none other than Rick Beato. He has an amazing channel and an extremely knowledgeable person about all things music. If you're not checking him out for some reason, definitely subscribe at the link in the description. But Rick delves into a topic that I think not enough attention is paid to, particularly for those of you that watch and have these questions about why some people are on the channel, why some people are not, why hasn't this person been on the channel yet? The reality is, in almost every case, the question has been asked and there's a reason for the response or non-response as a result of that, as Rick is going to go into. So let's take a look.
YouTube is crushing traditional media. What does that mean? Well, let me give you a few statistics on my own channel. I've recently hit 1 billion views on this channel thanks to you.
So one of the big points of contention here for Rick is that essentially there is still this big bias in favor of, let's say, legacy media. Late night talk shows, old school magazines that have big names, but aren't necessarily even in the same stratosphere of the numbers and sheer volume of audience that YouTube is currently providing. And he shows this chart from Nielsen. Nielsen measures cable. They've measured that for years. They measure streaming and entertainment consumption in the US and I'm sure in other places, but they show just how massive YouTube has become. Let's take a look.
How is YouTube crushing traditional media? The Nielsen gauge is a total TV and streaming snapshot. This is July 2024. If you look at streaming here, it's 41.4% of the pie.
So you've got this chart on the screen. It's called the gauge, Nielsen's total TV and streaming snapshot. So cable used to be the only game in town. Now it's at 26% and declining. And now streaming is, of course, on the upswing, 41%. And the biggest streaming platform is YouTube with 10.4%. Netflix is beneath that. Prime is beneath that. Hulu, Disney, and all the way down. It's just incomprehensible to think about how big and how relevant YouTube is as of now. I've always thought eventually technology is going to change. Eventually the internet is going to evolve. But in this current moment, in this current era that we're in, YouTube is such a massive force in entertainment, in music, you name it. And so a big part of that is one of the reasons Rick lays out is the depth of the conversations is much different than what you might see in a traditional media interview like a late night talk show, as he goes into right here.
My Sting interview, for example, got 3.6 million views 2 years ago. If you go to Sting on Jimmy Fallon, 547,000 views 5 years ago. Why? Because the title of the video is Sting lived in a haunted house and believes in ghosts. These are fluff things, 6 minutes and 32 seconds. Or Sting on Stephen Colbert. What number am I thinking of? 732,000 views 2 years ago. Or Sting on Jimmy Kimmel 4 years ago, 313,000 views. So it's more than all of those put together.
So as you can see, that is a significantly larger number of viewers on Rick Beato's podcast as opposed to even these late night interviews. But for some reason, there are guests that Rick Beato and many other podcasts, myself included, cannot get access to. And they're for very unfortunate reasons. I also think when you talk about these interviews that are basically fluff interviews and you look at the questions they ask, oh, let's sit down. We're going to go and talk to someone and ask them about their craziest haunted house experience. And there's really no depth to what they're talking about. And I think at this point, when content is so out there and widespread, people just want to hear authenticity and they want to hear real conversations. And so I think that is one of the reasons why Rick Beato has had so much success with this podcast, because he goes in real depth on these subject matters with the artists about the things that the fans want to hear. Whereas how many people at any given moment are watching Jimmy Fallon that have an in-depth knowledge of his catalog, his music, or are even likely to pick up and listen to his latest project? I just don't necessarily see how that transforms. But here's more of what Rick said.
So why is it that you haven't seen Jimmy Page on here or David Gilmour or any people like that? Honestly, I can't get to these people. I can't. I just can't. And that's just a fact. Their publicists don't know about YouTube because they've probably had the same publicist forever. Guys like Brian May, why did I have Brian May on my channel? Because Brian May is all over social media. He understands the power of it. Brian May's totally with it. But, I'm trying. I'll keep trying.
He's so spot on here, and this is one of the real reasons that you run into with a lot of these artists that you just think, man, that album could be promoted so much better if you weren't doing these sort of very limited conversations that leave so much to be desired and really doesn't address the stuff that the fans really want to hear. And when we have YouTube now, it doesn't really make a lot of sense as to why they're not doing that unless it's for a couple of different reasons. And I think the main reason is, as he pointed out, maybe it's their team just being either very antiquated in the way they do things, or also you run into a lot of extreme hesitancy. You run into a lot of people who are really, really careful and they're very risk averse. And so they don't really want to open up or talk about anything. So instead of worrying about that, they're going to go for the safe thing and they're going to sit down and talk about haunted houses. It's just unfortunate at this point where I don't even think we're really in a transitional period anymore. I thought we were in a transitional period in technology in like 2012. Now YouTube is like really well established. There's huge familiarity with it. So this idea that there's still this huge bias against artists doing interviews anywhere other than legacy magazines or late night talk shows. I don't know how many of you even have a cable subscription at this point. Two things is I want to leave you with. Take note and appreciate the artists who go on podcasts and really just put it out there, because it does take courage to do that, to just be vulnerable and just go for it. And, if you look at the guests that have been on this podcast, that have been on Rockfeed, these are people that more often than not have directly set things up with me. They're not dealing with handlers. There's not some sort of intermediary that's involved. It's just like, yo, dude, I'm going to come on the podcast. People like members of Motley Crue, members of Slipknot, members of Avenged Sevenfold. Corey Taylor is one of those guys. M. Shadows is one of those guys. Ronnie Radke is one of those guys. These are major musicians who are like, you know what? I like you, and I'm going to support you because of that. Because let me tell you, there's no other reason. I'm 100% independent. I know Rick Beato is independent. YouTube provides that opportunity where the only boss, the only person you have to listen to is y'all, the audience. And that is a beautiful thing. And so I just saw this video. I thought it was brilliant. So well put. Shout out to Rick Beato. This is such an important subject and one that I think was great for him to discuss, because I don't think people really realize how tough it is to be essentially outside of the business aspect of the music industry and to be able to get the type of artist, the caliber of guests that you're able to get without some sort of corporation behind you in some way. And so, not that there's anything wrong with that. There is not anything wrong with that, but it's like, at the end of the day, being independent, being on YouTube and making these things happen is really tough. With all of that said, I have some really exciting things on the way that I've been working on behind the scenes that you'll see in the near future. Really cool stuff, and it's a great time in rock, lots to be optimistic about. And I just want to say thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart for tuning into this channel and supporting what I do. Support Rick Beato, support what he's doing. Check it out down in the description. Much love, everybody, and thanks for tuning in.